Marilyn Cross Hudson was born in 1936, a daughter of a revered tribal chairman for the three affiliated tribes of North Dakota. She married her childhood sweetheart, went to college, and moved to California to work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It was her job to help people who were forced from their homes during the relocation years in the 1950s find new housing and employment. But Marilyn was eventually drawn home to her beautiful North Dakota, where she raised her two children and served as tribal historian for the three affiliated tribes.
She was my mother and taught me so much about the value of knowing history, preserving history, and considering it a gift to future generations to be able to stand and speak with confidence of who you are, where you came from, and where you're going.
One thing I do remember is anywhere we'd be traveling, I had opportunities to travel extensively, all across the globe. And no matter where I was going, Grandma always knew somebody that it was, whether it was in Hong Kong or Europe or what have you, there was just always a connection. And I think from a legacy standpoint, it's such a special thing how she connected all of these different people and different ideas and of people of all walks of life.
Many things were important to my mother. She was the most honorable person I knew. She was honest to a fault. Her integrity was insurmountable.
Marilyn Hudson, the late MHA Nation Elder and North Dakota historian, whose passion and love for her people and state inspired her family to find a way to keep her legacy alive by partnering with Humanities North Dakota. Welcome to the Marilyn Hudson Brave Conversation Project.
Good evening and welcome to all of you here in person. We have 116 people who joined us online. I'm Brenna Gerhardt, Executive Director of Humanities North Dakota. And if you don't know about our nonprofit, we have a number of board members sprinkled through the audience. Wave. They have all the dirt. Get it from them. It's great. This really fills my heart that you're here to honor Marilyn's legacy. The scholar we chose for this evening really embodies everything that Marilyn stood for: thoughtful and informed citizenship, community, and good faith engagement. Please welcome to the stage, Raffi Andonian.
I was standing on the porch of the Martin Luther King home in Atlanta, Georgia, leading a group of kids, about 10 to 12 of them, aged between 9 and 13. One had scars on the back of his neck. Another had his skull pushed in. Another had lash marks on his arms. And as we were walking up those stairs, as I was leading them on a tour to enter the MLK childhood home, the chaperone revealed to me that these kids were slaves. They had escaped from the illegal human trafficking trade in Haiti, and they had come to the United States only recently. And as refugees, one of the first things that they wanted to see was this home, the home of Martin Luther King. This is in 2010. These kids were born in 2000-ish, decades after MLK's assassination, and in a different country. And yet they wanted to come to this powerful place. As an adult, despite a childhood growing up seeing historic sites that inspired me into history, despite years of having worked at various sites like the Gettysburg Battlefield and elsewhere, that moment, above all else, taught me the power of historic sites, that the legacy of this historical figure these kids engage with through the power of place at this particular historic site, not duplicatable anywhere else. So it's with that power of place that I have in mind that I created a 4-question process of how to approach contested historic sites. As you know, we fight over historic sites, over historic monuments, over historic symbols and notions and concepts and characters and figures, heroes and villains. So the 4-question process is designed not to tell you exactly a blanket answer for everyone, but rather to be able to approach it in a diplomatic and a consistent way to understand the various perspectives involved. And that first question is, why remember? That's a question about significance. For example, up here, we have the atomic bomb. Now, here's a trivia question for you all. Specifically, what is that on the left? Now, we know that's a mushroom cloud, an iconic, emotionally powerful symbol. But can you identify where that is? Because I know you know it. So if you take a guess, you might actually guess it correctly. So give me, raise a hand. Let's see. No. Go a little sooner. Earlier. You're getting there a little later. All right, give me one of the first atomic bombs dropped in the world after the test. Who said Nagasaki? All right, I'm gonna give you one of the books. So you participate, you get rewarded. That's a photo from the Library of Congress of Nagasaki, the second atomic bomb that was dropped on Japan to end World War II. What you see up in the upper right is what's known as the gadget. If you watch the movie Oppenheimer, you would know that they refer to the gadget while they're creating the test bomb because they don't want the word to get out of what they're actually doing in case there's a leak. And that's me on TV presenting on the atomic bomb in New Mexico, where, of course, it was created. But the reason I bring this up for this question is because you may like what the bomb did, you may dislike what the bomb did. It depends on your perspective. Are you looking from the perspective of, the destruction that it caused, or looking from the perspective of the lives that it saved by avoiding further action? It goes beyond the bomb. How about nuclear energy? How about nuclear medicine? Right? Nuclear technology has shaped a lot of different things, both plus and minus. Just nuclear energy alone has its pluses and minuses. So the idea here is what we, I think, can agree on, whatever you think of the bomb and nuclear technology, that it certainly has significance. Why remember? The question of significance is the first place I would start. The second question, what is the history to be remembered? This is where we establish some of the factual what happened here. So for example, on the left, we have petroglyphs. It's my photo of places I've visited. Petroglyphs are very easy to read into because across centuries, there are many different peoples, cultures, eras of people that had left their mark. It was easy for me to read that artwork and say, well, I think it means this, and you think it means that. And sometimes I think people extrapolate a lot from that, kind of projecting what you wanted to me. But someone that did that 2,000 years ago is different than someone that did it 500 years ago. It's different than someone maybe that did it 100 years ago, because sometimes there were others that came later and scratched over them. So the point is that trying to get at what is to be remembered is a challenging thing. In the case of the examples on the right side, did a segment on the upper right there, you see on gas prices. Recently there was a lot of question about gas prices going up, reminding us of the 1970s. There was this issue of shortage. But actually, if you look and compare to the 70s, there are different historical contexts in which the 70s issues happen. So just because gas prices are changing does not mean that we have a repeat of history. So what that tells me is when we're talking about what is a history to remember, we have to pay attention to context. The context is what tells us what is happening there. in addition to some basic facts. For example, Battle of Gettysburg happened on July 1, 2, and 3 in 1863. That doesn't change. George Washington was not at Battle of Gettysburg. That doesn't change. So we establish some of these things. That's a separate question of whether I like the outcome of the atomic bomb or I like the outcome of a certain thing. Does that make sense? So we have now, what is the history to be remembered? The third question, what does it mean to remember? This is a very tough one. It's getting harder and harder. The reason this is difficult is because you have to really sit back and think, am I celebrating? Am I condoning? Am I commemorating? Am I condemning? What does it mean? There's usually some intention, some meaning behind it. A lot of times it varies based on the situation. So let's start on the left. I put that up because that was a monument that was in a lot of news in recent years, the monument to General Robert E. Lee on Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia, where I briefly worked and lived. To the right of that, the building that you see, is the Confederate White House, also in Richmond, Virginia. They're two different things. On the left, you have a commemorative statue and, overall monument that was put up a generation after the Civil War. You can go look specifically at the artist who commissioned it, who the artist was commissioned by, what they were commissioned to do, and what was said at the dedication speech and what some of the intentions are behind it. The White House of the Confederacy, on the other hand, is a place, a bit different than a monument. And when I refer to monument here, I'm referring specifically to sculptures and statues, not, sometimes we refer to a building as a monument, or sometimes refer to national monuments. We're talking, in this case, the statue monuments versus a place. There's only one White House of the Confederacy. There are many statues to Robert E. Lee. The White House of the Confederacy is kind of like the battlefield at Gettysburg. There's only one place that this happened, right? It's a place. It's different than statues to Lincoln, statues to MLK. They're all over the place. And they're not necessarily always a place that these people have even never been, let alone something historically significant happening there. So let's separate monuments and sites. It's something we often confuse. And when we step forward, when we step back from that and pay attention to that, that starts to give us a question of what does it mean to remember? So what does it mean to set aside a battlefield versus what does it mean to create or take down or somehow alter a monument? It's a different question. Another great example is the atomic bomb that we were just talking about. When the Manhattan Project National Historical Park, which is the national park dedicated to the creation of the atomic bomb, was being introduced in Congress, initially it was shot down because there was this concern that we're glorifying the bomb. Now, eventually it succeeded. But remember, that is more a site, right? It is a place, a little bit different than a monument that you might put up. Now, there is a silly picture up in the top you see there. That's me as an intern. I'm second from the right. 19 years old, intern at the battlefield at Gettysburg. I was not at the Battle of Gettysburg. I was at the battlefield. And what you see there is a group of Penn State grads. And our Penn State grads, because I was a Penn State undergrad, took a photo in front of a monument that was put up by the men whose unit included students from Penn State who fought in the Civil War. So in that case, what does it mean to remember was me remembering alum. So you see how sometimes we can see a photo, we can see something and project what we think it means. But sometimes we have to watch our own projections and our own meanings by asking, what does it mean to remember? What is the context of what is being done here and how? What you see there on the right is exactly on this question. There was a big problem with the monument to Juan de Oñate in New Mexico a couple of years ago that led to gunfire and actually flared up again this year, a different monument to Oñate, also in New Mexico, and gunfire also. I did a TV segment on that, to get TV coverage, and that story went on to win an Emmy Award for the way we handled the topic. Finally, the fourth question, and this is the most difficult one, and I'm going to spend the most time on, is how remember? So now we've established significance with the first question. We've established what we're talking about with the second question. We've established what does it mean to go forward with this enterprise, with a third question. And now we have to talk about, well, then now how do we tell these stories? How do we tell the stories that have multiple layers, multiple facets, different perspectives? So let's start with the Confederate flag, one of my favorites to unpack because it is so rich and complicated. On the left, you have a picture of the crowning of a KKK leader. Clearly, you have multiple symbols in there, including the Confederate flag that is being associated actively by these folks with their cause. Now, it wasn't always that way. They started doing this around the 1940s is really when it picked up, not in generations prior. But once they put it in, then it kind of stuck around for a long time. On the right side, you see the Confederate flag being used at a Florida water park, much more benign in the context of entertainment. It was seen as a pop culture symbol. It was on the General Lee, right, in the TV show. I forgot the name now. The Dukes of Hazzard. You might have seen it on the front of a truck. I'm not talking about the pickup. I'm talking about the 18-wheeler. You see it in the Spanish soccer games. It's transcended, become pop culture. Sometimes it means rebellion. Sometimes it means a certain heritage. Actually, I knew a friend in Georgia who was a descendant of enslaved people in the Confederacy who flew the Confederate flag as a connection to his heritage. I'm talking about a complicated story. It can be multiple things depending on the context, right? But how do you tell the story of a flag like this? I tried. Up there, you see me as a park ranger doing an evening program, doing a lecture on the many generations and different uses of the Confederate flag. How about this? Here's a way to tell stories. How about actually doing reenactments? Now, I don't think reenactments are always the most effective way to do things because at times, or a lot of times, they're historically inaccurate. But they can be done on a small demonstration. We call that living history. So it means you're not firing at each other, but you have people that are demonstrating how these things work, right? In a more educational type of setting. Now, if you go to a reenactment, a lot of times it says they're firing at each other. It's nice to see how it sounds and hears, but they're commercial enterprises usually. So there's not really a lot of historical accuracy. So you got to be careful with that. You go in, you pay to go in, you pay to get a better seat, then you pay to get sold more stuff when you're in there. So you're like at a ball game or something. It just keeps paying and paying and paying, you know? But when you go to some historic sites, like the National Park Service and others, Colonial Williamsburg is another place, lots of places you can go. You can see people in character. You can see people on a small scale demonstrating things. So you learn from it. That's a little bit different. That's what we call living history. So you see there are firing, so you can understand the sights and sounds. Now, why does that matter for how to remember? Well, if you have the smoke, that's nothing compared to the real battle, which had 160,000 combatants. So, but you already can see that it's kind of hard to see. And you can imagine it's going to be kind of loud, right? So then when you read the accounts of this guy, he thinks he's over there, but he's actually over there. We can tell from other sources, and he's lost. Or when you try to understand how come they're acting illogically at times, or he doesn't follow his orders. That's some of the reason why. They don't understand what's going on. That's how you tell these stories and understand the different angles and how you can have multiple eyewitness accounts of the same thing and they have different accounts. And now you got to figure out how to put this together. Now, a fun photo on the right side is me sort of in the middle standing there. You can see me with the black hair. When I first went to Gettysburg, they made me put on the uniform, a wool uniform. I found the one that fits. I didn't care if it was Union or Confederate. And you had to march across the battlefield. And then we got to camp on the battlefield overnight. If you go there, you can't camp on the battlefield. You can camp adjacent, but not on the battlefield. So I got to do something special. But the reason they did that is because they said, we want you to feel what it's like to march in wool in the sun so you understand what you're talking about when you're out there. Now, I did not have to march 30 miles the day before to get there. I had it a lot easier. I had plentiful food and water, but it gave me a tiny taste. So sometimes just experiencing it is how you tell the stories. How about commemoration? This is in the upper left there, a photo of the unknown soldiers from the cemetery at Gettysburg. Almost 1,000 of them. No identity. The ultimate sacrifice. Giving up who you are. Of course, Lincoln came there within months of the battle and delivered the Gettysburg Address. And to me, commemoration can be another way to consider how to tell these stories. In fact, I still have with me this pen. This pen is made from the wood of what we call a witness tree. A witness tree means that it was there witnessing the historical event that we're talking about. There was a tree that was very close to Lincoln during the Gettysburg Address. We only have a handful of witness trees across the entire battlefield, and this is the only one that actually doesn't exist anymore. But 12 years ago or so, when I was there, lightning hit it, and I worked there, and one of my coworkers got access to the wood and made some pens out of the limb that was destroyed by the lightning. Insider perks. So don't worry, we didn't take down the tree just so I can get a pen. But we use the leftovers. But when we talk about how to tell the story, what that helps me see and understand is sometimes it's taking something tangible and connecting back to the intangible. This directly connects me to that moment that is still referred to, that helps define the nation's ideals. And that's what commemoration can mean. That's the power of how you can tell these stories, even sometimes, of course, through artifacts or through connecting pieces. How about these stories here? Up in the upper left, you have the Bryan Farm. That's a house that is on the battlefield. The reason that I point that out is because that was a free Black family that was there just north of the Mason-Dixon line, afraid that they would get enslaved by the Confederate Army that was invading up north, because there were accounts of that happening, simply because of the color of their skin being identified as slaves and being brought into slavery. You can tell the story through places like that home, or these monuments on the right side that were put up by the veterans themselves, which adds a layer of complexity. It's not you and me putting up monuments, it's the veterans themselves that are putting up the monuments. And when they put up these monuments, they have inter-rivalries. I came further than you did. No. We were more key to the outcome of the battle. No. We defeated that unit, which was more important. And all that interpolitics within the Union men absolutely plays out on the battlefield. So are monuments necessarily historically accurate? Depends who you ask, right? Whose perspective, whose ego, right? So monuments are representations of what we want to remember about the past, and who's behind it matters, including if it's the veterans themselves, because they have the rivalries amongst each other. When we're telling the story of the atomic bomb, which is what my book was on, and many of you guys have read, so to connect this to the book. On the left side, if you're looking at that story of destruction that we talked about, you're going to tell a different story than if you look at the right side, which is the exhilaration of victory. Which angle are you going to use in how to remember? These are the challenges of telling these stories that have many facets. How about a community building? This is one of my favorite buildings in all the country, Fuller Lodge in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the atomic bomb was created. In the upper left, you see a historical photo from the Los Alamos Ranch School, which was a boys' school that was there prior to the Manhattan Project. As part of the reason the Manhattan Project, which created the atomic bomb, came there was some infrastructure there to house the scientists, although it turned out to be not nearly enough, but when they're thinking about it ahead, that's what they're thinking about. Today, that Fuller Lodge is still there. In fact, I got to work in it for a while. And what you see on the lower right there is an image of a present-day event for the community. It's a public space. These places don't always have to be museums behind a red rope. You can go in and interact with them. Communities share memories in there, weddings, job fairs, lectures. These are the kinds of things that you may go to. High school dances. Another way of how to remember. It's not always encased in something you can't touch, but you can continue to use it as a community center as it was used across decades. How about this here? Just recently, I was part of a documentary, and I got to go kind of get special access. And one of the things I got to access was basically a family gathering. This was a descendants gathering. Descendants of the enslaved people from some of the presidential homes in Virginia, mainly from Jefferson, Monroe, and Madison. Not necessarily direct descendants of the presidents, although some may be, but in descendants of the enslaved populations that are on those properties. So who we have here on the left that you see in yellow is actually descendant from the Hemings family. And on the right, and you may know Hemings, Sally Hemings, of course, a lot of evidence linking her to Thomas Jefferson and the kids they had together. She would come from the lineage as her brother, so from the Hemings family, but not directly from Sally. And then on the right in pink, we have a descendant from the enslaved people of Monroe's property in Virginia. Now, in this case, how to remember, for these folks, it's a family affair. You can see the food up there. It's just like a family reunion. It's a really incredible setting to be in and a different way to engage with the past. And I want to give you a flavor of what that felt like. And speaking of food, how about taking food on TV and interacting with it? You ever have your grandmother's recipes and you feel like it reminds you of your grandma? When you recreate it, it's a way of engaging with your family history. Not all of it has to be global, like the atomic bomb. Often it's local, it's familial. These are some examples. Up in the upper right, we have the whiskey. Talked about the Whiskey Rebellion, and you've all know about it, with George Washington. So we thought we'd drink some whiskey to make it real. On live TV in the morning. They did it, poured a whiskey, didn't know if the anchor was going to drink it. He did, so I started drinking too. In the upper left, we have, are you following George Washington's rules for civility on the 4th of July? I certainly was not in that image. So I was trying to show you what not to do according to George Washington. You have all kinds of different fun ways. In the lower left, you have an English dish that George Washington served for Christmas. In the lower right, you have me trying to shave with peanut butter, because that was a historical use that was promoted by the peanut man, George Washington Carver, who taught at Tuskegee. So you can make things fun and engaging, engage your senses. You know, I was at a historic building earlier today in Fargo doing some historic photographs, and I was walking around and I could hear the floor squeaking, right? That sort of old wood sound. To me, that's part of the feeling and the sense. This history, I made an Instagram video, you can go look at it. I said it, like history is a sensory experience. It's another way you can engage your senses. Now let's talk about the quarters. Because today, in fact, if you have change in your pocket, I want you to pull it out and look for a quarter. Look for all the quarters you got. I'm willing to bet you money that you found, you're going to have one on, I bet you money about the money, right? This is the American Women Quarters Program. These women are honored, there's 20 of them, honored over the course of 4 years, from 2022 to 2025. We're 9 quarters in right now. I've done TV segments on all of them, one of which you're seeing up there. And the one I want to highlight for us here today is Edith Kanakaole. She was indigenous from Hawaii. And when Hawaii is a relatively recent state, in many of their lifetimes of the folks here. And as it became a state, there was a lot of pressure for assimilation. There still is today because of tourism and other things, right? So the idea here is this. She tried very hard to protect indigenous lands, indigenous culture, language, from the pressures of assimilation, losing land, losing the traditional dances and songs. She established schools. So when we talk about historic places and symbols, these are great examples, right? Language, culture, song, dance, place, land. That's why I bring her in as an example here today. Now I'm going to circulate a fresh set from the US Mint. These are the same thing. I'm going to circulate on both sides. You'll see all 5 women from the 2023 series. Edith is on there as well. The reason I bring up the quarter is because what this tells me is there are 2 sides to the coin. And actually, I'd love to see more sides, but the quarter is only 2 sides. So we'll go with 2 for now, but there are at least 2 sides to understanding these stories. To tell the story of historic sites in the United States, we have George Washington, who helped create the country, and Edith Kanakole, who helped complete and deliver and fulfill more of the promises from George Washington. I'm going to wrap up in a moment with a theme here for you guys to consider from one of my historical heroes and tie it all locally. George Wythe is one of my favorite historic figures, and for many reasons, but probably not the reasons you think. George Wythe is actually one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He was such a mentor to many of the men from Virginia that they left the top line open for him so he can be on top of the 7 signers from Virginia. And one of the signers that he's mentored was Thomas Jefferson, who you see there on the right. Of course, he not only signed it, but he mostly wrote it. And on the lower right, who did not sign, he was too young, is John Marshall, the first strong Supreme Court justice we had. What you see there in the left is me at the George Wythe home, one of the most intact historical homes you can go visit today. The reason I point this out is because in those rooms, he tutored both Jefferson and Marshall. Jefferson, when he became president, was nasty rivals with Marshall, Supreme Court justice. They were heads of 2 different branches of government, right? They became bitter rivals, but they had the same teacher. They had the same teacher. What does that tell you? That tells you that you can learn, you can be smart people, brilliant, make a great career, be intellectually sound, have the same teacher and have different outcomes and opinions and perspectives and jurisprudence and political theory and political philosophy. That's a great teacher to me. That's what I try to keep in mind. Someone who doesn't inculcate to say you must think like me, but gives you the tools and the equipment to be able to develop yourself, even if that means a couple of your stars go in different directions. That's why George Wythe remains to me a historical hero. And I think nowhere captures some of these themes better than some of the sites in the Dakotas. I'm going to focus only on one, which is Whitestone Hill. Many of y'all may have heard of it. Actually, the 160th anniversary just passed, just last month. Whitestone Hill, if you don't know about it, was an action that is possibly the bloodiest of the massacres during the Indian Wars, so-called. Comparable to, some of y'all may know, the Sand Creek in Colorado. Of course, there's one in South Dakota also with Wounded Knee. A few hundred men, women, and children were killed, wounded, and captured by US soldiers that basically encircled them and cut off their retreat and provoked the fight, cut off the retreat, kind of trapped them in a ravine, and had a very one-sided, that's why I think it should be called probably more a massacre than a battle. Battle is an overstatement. But what's interesting about this story, to me, is a monumentation. In the upper right, you have a 1909 gathering, and in the lower, kind of the wide image, you have a 1914 gathering of a monument that was dedicated only a few years prior. It was put up for the dead white soldiers from this engagement, not the dead indigenous folks. And when it was put up, remember we were talking about you just need to read the dedication? I'm going to read to you a line from the dedication. As one person said about the soldiers, they were ready to take the arduous task of supplanting the red man, thus working out the law of the survival of the fittest, in order that the white man, the highest type of civilization, should have full sway. Now, not all monuments may be that way, but sometimes when you go back to the documents in the dedication, there's a specific group of people putting it up for a certain reason. You can get an understanding of what it's supposed to mean. And in this case here locally, I think they make pretty clear what it's supposed to mean. Now, what do you do with something like this? I think it's complicated because it's both a historic site, because there's only one White Stone Hill, and there's an issue of a monument with the monumentation. Those are two different things. And in this case, they aren't both in the same place. So it makes it even more complicated. This is why I say there's nothing that embodies it better, because it really, you can really have an extended discussion with these questions over this place. Now, you may know recently the state allocated a couple $100,000 for a monument to the local indigenous dead to go up there at White Stone Hill. Now, I don't know exactly where that effort is because that allocation is very recent, but you may be seeing that come into fruition in the coming years. So you can go locally in the state to go check it out. It's in Dickey County. So you can go check it out, and a great place to engage with some of these stories. That's me. If you want to see more, I really encourage you to follow me on the social media, on Instagram there, or you can go to my website, celebrityhistorian.com. Of course, you go on YouTube, check out my videos going on TV all over the country. I try to cover a lot of different topics, try to do it with the same approach as I like to, like I said to George With, the company program I have, Harmonize Your Workforce, all kinds of things related to history. And what I want you guys to remember from this is the humanities, history, which is one of them, are such a valuable tool to gaining insight not only into the past, but into relevance today on media, in business, in lectures, so that we can understand how to use what we learn from these, not with simple takeaways and lessons that history teaches that everyone must always follow the same way, but with the lessons that connect to complexity, the lessons that allow us to go deeper into inquiry, the way that philosophy would want us to have, a cousin of history, also in the humanities, so that we can better understand the world around us with open-ended questions rather than predetermined conclusions that we then look to the past to try to justify and draw the line to our present position. Whatever you think, history disagrees. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. So with that framework, we're gonna have a discussion at your tables, facilitated. We'll also have a Q&A afterwards with me. But for now, let's talk around the table for each of y'all. I'll walk around and interact with you guys with these 4 questions in mind. You have the blueprint. This is not the blueprint, right? But you all saw the blueprint. You saw some examples to stimulate your mind. Now you have some questions that you can consider at your tables amongst each other. So we'll give you that time. I'm gonna wander around. And of course, in the meanwhile, pass around that quarter, the quarters. Feel free to keep passing around. You can give it to me at the end. There's no rush. All right, some great discussion. I was wandering around, so I appreciate that. That's exactly what this is meant to do, right? We set these questions out. You have a blueprint on how to approach things. So now what we're gonna do is, let's do the Q&A. So we got 2 stations, left and right. You can go up and ask. Oh, we'll bring you to, okay, gotcha. Now, before we jump in there, before we jump to Q&A, I got something I want to do real quick. Did you all, I heard some jingling, or, people were pulling out quarters. Did anyone find one of the American women? You had to.
Yes.
Ah, awesome. I'm going to give you a book. You said you found one too? Here, good too. So if you look closely, I'm sure some of you all had it too. You may not realize it, but you just have to look close and make sure you're seeing one of the women on there. It may not be from 23, it may be from 22. There's 9 of them so far. A 10th one is coming out pretty soon here in the next couple of weeks. And you'll see 5 more a year for the subsequent 2 years in 24 and 25. And I'll just say real quick, I know we got to get to Q&A, but if you go to usmint.gov, so it's straight from the Mint, you can actually see more about the program, see the 2024 names that just got released. They have not released 25 yet because they're taking submissions from the public. So you can submit who you think should be considered. So this is very organic, the way these women are being selected, chosen to be on money. And the reason this matters so much is because money is where nations honor their heroes. And you're now putting these folks on the same platform as George Washington, the father of the country. Q&A.
Does anybody want to stump Raffi?
Can you all hear me? In my class, I don't even need the microphone. I just yell at people all the time. Some of you are my former students, so you know from past experience. But I found it really interesting. Could you talk more about how using something other than just lecturing or talking to people works? Because it made me think of my colleague, Ashley Baggett, who makes hardtack for her Civil War class. So people can have that experience, and it's vastly different. By the way, hardtack stinks on ice. It's terrible. But could you do a little bit more with that? Because I never thought of that before, using other ways of getting at an idea.
Yeah, so I've had hardtack too, and the first time I had it was when I was dressed up as that Civil War soldier. That was part of the experience, you know, having a hardtack. And you're right, it's really tough. It's actually hard on your teeth too. But a great example also of food and engaging the senses of a way to engage with history, right? It's a great example. Now, so some other ways to do this in communication. Now, we talked about a few in the talk, right? Like we talked about the food and commemoration and experiencing it and the sights and sounds, etc. But I think also what we have to think about is beyond lectures. Now, I love being Humanities Councils are some of my favorite organizations in the world. All right, I mean, really, I cannot believe that I now get to speak for a Humanities Council, because I used to be looking up to Humanities Councils, you know, and I still do, you know, from an audience member, volunteer, I volunteer for Humanities Councils, all kinds of things. But we also need to be good at being able to talk beyond our circles, right? Because we got to draw people into understanding the value of humanities. All y'all probably already understand the value of humanities, but how do we reach the people that are beyond that? I do think eating is one of those ways. But it starts with communication, because you got to get them to the table to eat it. I mean, literally, to even be in the room with the hardtack, to get a chance to do it. And I think what the most important thing is not, are they coming to you, but what are you doing to go to them? You know, I have a lot of sports background also, and I love to study sports kind of intellectually too. And one of the things you see in sports is championship teams win on the road. Y'all know this. I know NDSU does pretty well in football. Now, what happens is that, think about it this way. You can have a good team and they play well at home, but when they play on the road, they kind of start to not be as good. But a championship team, the truly excellent ones, can deliver the same execution and process despite being in a foreign environment. Championship teams win on the road. So if you really master your material so that you can repackage it to the environment that you're in, that's when you're able to reach new audiences. So you got to be able to take your game on the road. Now, in my case, of course, what it has meant is going on major network TV news stations, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox stations. You'll notice I don't go on things like the History Channel. Now, I don't think the History Channel is all that great, but even if it was, that's not what I'm trying to reach. I'm trying to reach people where they are to pull them in. So how do I make it relevant in places that don't normally care about history? Got to find my hooks, right? How do you make, even when I talk in businesses, right? I have this business program that I do, a training program. I don't go to a business and say, hey, I want to talk history to your business. I can say, why would I do that? Right? Now, I think the humanities give great skills for business, but someone's not always going to see that right away without having some kind of humanities background. So I use the humanities as a lens to give them better interpersonal understanding and leadership training, decision-making. They do care about interpersonal understanding, teamwork, people getting along. They do care about better decision-making and avoiding groupthink, evaluating and analyzing data, how to evaluate multiple angles and make a decision. They do care about those things. So now if we get some cool history programming that's fun and engaging, not pre-recorded click-through that you're just snoozing through, the entertainment is part of the hook. So you've got to create a good show for them to come. If you make people smile, it's a big step in the right direction. It drops the guard. It opens them up. Think about it. In history, what do people think a lot of times? It's boring. I had to memorize it. I had a bad teacher. I hated the tests in high school. That's why I wear the pink bow tie. Really. Because when you look at it, you're going to be like, wow, okay. You're going to smile. What's the first word that you can just shout it out? What's the first word that comes to mind when you see that? What was it? Fun? I heard a bunch of people say fun. I get that 80, 90% of the time. Exactly. That's not what you think of history, is it? But when you say fun, turns the thing upside down. Celebrity historian. I'm going to have fun with it. Right? Even if it's a difficult topic, I'm going to make it engaging. So that the branding, the show, the hook, to me is just as important, because you can be great at home, but can you really bring the game on the road in a foreign environment? That's the question. So we, as humanities folks, have to be able to go where others are that are not already our brethren and figure out how can we bring value to them, to connect with them, and use our tools and lenses to add as an avenue for them to help them with their objectives. Meet people on their terms and you get a lot further. Yes.
Thank you. Along that line, you probably read the book "Lies My History Teacher Told Me."
Yeah,
and
it's been a long time, but yes.
I think it's a good example of one thing, trying to get people to understand history through their own efforts, not just memorizing dates and so on, which is what I had in high school. And I think that's really crucial to a better understanding of where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add that I agree that you should try to understand history on your own, and in that it's a lifelong journey. I mean, you know, I don't even know everything about my areas of specialty, let alone going outside of my areas of specialty. And understanding that intellectual humility is really important. And not just the factual information, but new layers and angles that I always get added to my perspective, the more I learn things, right? But when you study on your own, what I would caution you is make sure that you're not just reading things or going to sites or engaging with interpretations that already agree with you. Now, there's actually someone, I forgot his name now again, Brenna, but he does The Beauty of Being Wrong. David Brickley. So he does a course for Humanities North Dakota, and I had him speak as a guest in my course that I teach for Humanities North Dakota through their public university program, because I loved his lens. And what he tries to do is figure out how you're wrong and all the ways you can be wrong. And I think a lot of times we approach something and we try to find all the ways we're right. A great example, I do some stuff on the Constitution too, and the founders and so on. And we may look back and say, I mean, you hear this all the time. You hear this all the time in politics and just in general. You hear, well, the founding fathers believed blah, right? And automatically that's supposed to be buttressing my argument of why I'm correct. Now, first of all, I think you can disagree with the founders on some things. It's okay. But let's just take that as a premise. The problem is that the founding fathers didn't believe one thing. I could go back if I'm looking for something and pull a quote and say that, boom, there it is. But if I keep reading, this is the problem, you didn't keep reading. if I keep reading, you may find that actually the same person might say something different somewhere else, let alone if I go to all the other different leadership. And that's assuming that you didn't lift that quote out of context, which is also an assumption I'm being very generous on, because a lot of times this stuff is out of context. You don't know what you're reading, because you have to understand the era, the context, the language, the assumptions, the norms to really understand that document. So jumping straight to primary sources can be challenging because you can read into it from what you're thinking rather than understand the setting that it's in. So that's a problem in itself. So I would say you should absolutely learn by yourself, but man, it's a big process. It's not reading one thing or a second thing or another. It's immersing yourself. It's intentionally challenging yourself. And that's why I say whatever you think history disagrees, because keep reading. I promise you, you'll find stuff that disagrees with whatever neat conclusion you're trying to come up with, because the vast tapestry of the peoples of the past doesn't fit into neat boundaries into a little box. So necessarily, it's going to complicate the way that you're thinking and see multiple valid ways. So studying on your own is important, but be careful not to simply validate what you already believe and apply what David does in trying to find why you're wrong, not just why you're right.
All right, Raffi.
Yes.
Raffi, am I on here? We have a question from online. In your opinion, what is the most problematic site or monument in the nation?
Oh man, problematic. I would love to define what they mean by problematic, because that is one of the questions, but I'll make an assumption here. So a couple of things. So one, we got to define problematic, but two, I don't pretend I know every monument inside in the country, although I've been to a lot, having lived in 6 states, 12 or 13 towns and cities, and done all kinds of study travel. But the most problematic, gosh, you know, you asked me today, and I might answer a different thing tomorrow or the next day. Problematic. How about I might say the it's Bosque de Redondo, which is where the Navajo Long Walk happened. And I'll tell you why I think it's at least very difficult. How about that? I'm going to so the Navajo Long Walk in 1864. So let me step back for a second. So Whitestone Hill we talked about happened in 1863. I mentioned we just passed the 110th anniversary. Just to kind of contextualize this for you all, it's 2 months after the Battle of Gettysburg, which we were just talking about. I mean, during the Civil War. Pretty incredible to kind of contextualize that way. Under Lincoln, right? Under Abe Lincoln as president. In that context of all these actions taking place, and we were just talking about this at this table, you know, you have what's called the Navajo Long Walk, which actually also includes some Apaches, but in New Mexico, the federal troops march the Navajo and the Apaches into basically these camps and hold them there. This is in 1864, also during the Civil War, also under Abraham Lincoln. Talk about these stories that are complicated. And the reason that came to mind for problematic, I mean, yes, there are many places and sites that have challenging histories. You could talk about Manzanar, which is a Japanese internment camp in California. That's a national park. We can talk about the atomic bomb site. I mean, that's a big, huge thing. That's a difficult one, right? We just talked about Whitestone Hill. The reason that one comes to mind is because it involves Kit Carson. And Kit Carson is often seen as sort of, you know, the pathfinder, the hero, Western hero. And he did do heroic things, absolutely. But this is also part of his legacy. And there's this debate over, you know, was he just executing orders? Could he have not done it? I mean, it's just really complicated. And the reason I think it's problematic is because I struggle with how to interpret that. Because I do think that Kit Carson achieved amazing things. And sometimes he was actually an incredible advocate of indigenous peoples. And then at the same time, he also was part of taking some other indigenous peoples and basically, you know, doing this encampment, this concentration camp that led to a lot of pain and trouble. And the reason it's problematic is I have a hard time interpreting how to interpret that, because he's on extreme ends of the spectrum on indigenous peoples at different points. So how do you interpret a figure like Kit Carson? He's a hero in some other states surrounding New Mexico, but in New Mexico, he's not. In New Mexico, he's looked down upon. A great example of historical memory. Can be different perspectives depending on where you're at. Part of the reason is because in New Mexico, much like in the Dakotas, you have a lot of indigenous presence, right? So those memories are still there. So that is something that is going to play a factor. So another layer of being problematic, right? Because you have all these different groups. And I'm not sure that there's an easy answer to this, because I understand with Oñate, we were talking about it, why Oñate could be so important to descendants of the Spanish Empire. But I also understand why you may not like him, right? And why he keeps being a source of conflict for the indigenous people. So now I don't think that's the most problematic, but what I'm saying in that case is I don't know how there's a clear one answer forward to make everyone happy. So you have to have some really big discussions to try to get there. And I think that site for the Navajo Long Walk, because it has Kit Carson involved, makes it particularly problematic. And on top of it, it's happening during the Civil War period, the same war that is a war for emancipation and helps end slavery. And at the same time, under the same president, we have that going on. That's a lot of pieces for me to piece together, and I have a hard time with it. So I'd say problematic there. Yes.
Our table talked about monuments, and so we'll piggyback on this previous question. I would like to know if, we talked about Teddy Roosevelt moving from New York to Medora in North Dakota, but on the monument case, has there ever been throughout history a monument that has been removed but now is back in esteem?
I do not know the answer to that. I mean, has it ever been? I mean, I'm sure that's happened. But if one that has been removed and now back, there might be some it is possible if you look on some battlefields, there might be some of that. I'm not sure if you're referring to any of the recent stuff. I do not know of them being back in their original place. But there's so many communities that this stuff took place in that, I certainly do not have a comprehensive list, right? So I'm open to, if anyone knows of that, I'd love to know that story. I do know that it's been on the table of discussion in some cases as an option, but a lot of times those things have led to just indecision, like nothing's really happened. It just kind of sits aside until someone figures out, and they still haven't figured it out, So I'm trying to think of a battlefield example, and I feel like there's one out there, but it's not coming to me.
So your mentioning of the nuclear bomb as something with a contested history got me thinking about something directly related to that of a contested history that involves the United States, and that's between Japan and Korea, the Korean Peninsula, but I guess South Korea now, because the United States dropped the bomb on Hiroshima on August 6th, which is still a day of memorial and commemoration in Japan. And then within the same month, a few weeks later, once Japan got its ducks in a row, they officially relinquished control of their territories and conquered areas, including Korea. So their Independence Day that they celebrate from Japan is also just a few days later, also in August. And I was wondering, how do you square the revelry with which Korea and even to some extent the United States would celebrate the dropping of the bomb with the sobriety that Japan may feel, including some people in the United States who kind of learn more extensive history, like that the fact that there may have been surrender negotiations already started, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you square the revelry with the sobriety on the two sides?
I think it's context matters, but as a general thought, I would say that is important, kind of like I did with the two photos, to demonstrate the two different sides of it, right? I don't think that is a clear answer if it's all one way or another. And I think, honestly, both sides of that debate, I don't necessarily mean Japan and the US, because I realize there are individuals within each country that are going to believe differently, right? So both sides, as in the positions, let's say, could be better understanding of why someone might think the other way. I'll give you an example. When I was in Los Alamos, you would go to the museum and read the visitor comments, and you would see sometimes, on one side, the atomic bomb was the greatest thing. It saved my grandfather's life because it was GI that didn't go in, right, because of the bomb. And you look at the other side, the atomic bomb is evil. It changed the world and it killed a bunch of people. Well, I think both of those guys could help understand from each other, and I think that's how I would square it, is understanding how you can understand both sides. Now, I will say that context is a lot, and I don't think from a nation state standpoint, you don't have any victims. Of course, you have civilians who are victims, right? But from a nation state standpoint, because you have to look at the information they have at the time, right? So we have to be careful with hindsight, and B, the rhetoric is really nasty between the two. And the Japanese emperor is quite clear, you know what I mean? And even when the surrender happens, in his announcement, he refers to the bomb as being one of the reasons. So I am not a fan of some of the interpretation lately that is saying it was entirely unnecessary. I would say that's unfair. That's too far the other way. Now, it is true to say that during the time of the bomb dropping, there was debate, absolutely, and the movie gets at that. Although few people questioned if it should be used at all, they questioned how it should be used. So, for example, it could be used as a threat, it could be used as a demonstration in an island off the coast. There's all kinds of ways you could use it. There's that famous letter of a scientist, which the movie also portrays, of saying, let's not use it. Now, Oppenheimer did not sign that, but he did feel like he had to present it because he felt like he had to represent scientists. But if you read the letter, what it says is, let's try demonstrations as an option A. If that doesn't work to bring him to negotiation, then we can use it on the targets that we've outlined. So even the people opposed to it, they did leave the door open to use it. So I do think in a time of war, as hard as it is for us to understand, we have to understand in that context that can be a real option. But certainly there are debates in how it should be interpreted. And scientists did understand that politicians don't understand what the scientists understand in terms of the vastness and the destruction of what it can do. And there is some truth to what happened since, because now that we've seen it, we all kind of know we don't have to believe the scientists like, oh my God, that can really do some damage. And the bombs today are 100 times stronger than the one back then. So is that a fair answer? The squaring I'm saying is, I think sometimes we want to validate what we believe. So we then look back and get pulled into this question of, should it have been used the way it was or not? And my thing is, we have to not start from that position and understand each other's perspectives first. And number two, change the question of, let me understand the debate in the context of the time from all the different parties involved, rather than trying to advocate should or should not. I don't like playing armchair quarterback. Like Monday morning quarterback, right? You knew what the quarterback should have done on Sunday. I don't think that's a good way to understand how the game unfolded. Yes.
So I want to come back to the Theodore Roosevelt statue. So this is the statue. It's outside the Museum of Natural History in New York. Roosevelt on horseback, on foot next to him, below him, an African-American man and a Native American man. And so New York didn't want it anymore. And it has come to North Dakota. And in discussions with the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library Association about what they were going to do with it, because they've had some pushback about it. It wasn't happily accepted as maybe some people thought it would be in North Dakota. Is they said, well, we think we could set it up and recontextualize it and, provide other information about it. And I've heard that same process proposed for some of the Robert E. Lee statues. And I'm curious, a couple of questions I'd ask. One is, do you really think this can work? Or do you know of a case where this seems to have worked? And is there a difference with this recontextualizing idea with monuments versus sites?
Okay. So let me start with the second question first. A site to me, because I see it as fundamentally different than a statue monument that we're talking about, there is a difference, yes, because there's a big difference, let's say, between Manzanar, the site where Japanese internment happened, and putting up a monument to, let's say, I mean, it depends what you want to do with the monument, but the monument saying, wasn't it great that we interned these Japanese Americans, right? Like that, so there is a difference between that monument and a site. It can be painful, the site, but a site is a singular place where that particular thing happens. I think it creates, therefore, a forum in which you can have these kinds of conversations that you may not normally have. They also tend to cause reflection with the people around you, and I think a reflective state is a much better place to begin a discussion rather than a fiery debating state. So yes, I do think contextualizing signage around a monument versus a site is a big difference. Now, we're talking about the monument at Whitestone Hill. I think signage there would be a very different thing around the monument, which is going to talk about how was this monument, what was this monument doing in a commemoration versus signage there that is about the site of what happened at the site. Those are two different stories. Now, if you go there, they do have that signage, which is really cool. They have a signage of both the event itself and the memory of the event or the commemoration of the event. So that's actually an example where you can see both kinds of signage, and I do think it works there. Yes, in my opinion. You know, now if you're asking me, so yes, I just gave you an example of somewhere where I do think it's fair and it works. I will just add a layer to your question, though. The state of North Dakota wants to add that additional monument we talked about, just to give you just to run with that example. That's cool with me. I mean, like, you want to keep changing monuments, you know, adding monuments, that's fine by me, you know. I don't think every generation necessarily has to be stuck with what another generation decided to commemorate. So if one generation gets an opportunity to commemorate, another generation should also have that opportunity. Now you open this question of, well, how? Does that mean we have to take down the old one and put the new one up? No, not necessarily. I think it depends on the situation. Depends on the situation. But first, let's start with the question of, okay, well, if a next generation wants to commemorate something else, they can have that opportunity too. They can have that opportunity too, because historical memory, which is the way we decide to remember the past, is something that is always created in the present by the present generation. So every layer of memory, to me, you know, is equally valid or invalid. You know, they're the same thing. They're attempts to interpret the past. And I think that adds to the layers of understanding the past. So I do think that another way to deal with it is to have these sites that are changing. Look at the community building we talked about in Los Alamos. That's also always changing, right? The essence is the same, but it has new bathrooms, it has new whatever, because they're trying to keep using the resource, right? So it's okay for things to change and adapt. The place I was at this morning doing my photos, it's an old, I think, school that's now serving as studios, art studios and other things that are there, some retail shops. So those are, to me, examples of using historic resources that continue to change to adapt to what the present generation wants, but with a nod toward the identity of the place rather than, you know, not having that building at all. And I think the same goes with the sites and monuments. I do like to see sites protected. Monuments, I think it's a situational thing as to what makes sense. And it's also not for me to necessarily dictate. I do think the voices in the community are going to be part of the outcome of this. I'd rather present the, you know, sort of a way to discuss this stuff. But I do think that it is possible that signage and contextualization can be a solution, but not always the solution, because it's contextual. It matters on the situation. Is that fair? Did that answer what you had in mind?
We have time for one more question.
All right.
All right. So you are someone who's studied a lot of history. Are there any particular events or topics in history that you don't believe receive as much attention as they should, or or that you think are worth studying?
All of it. But you'd be amazed at the stuff that you think we know and we don't. A mentor of mine just released a book, two books actually, on the Battle of Antietam. and the Berlin Battle of Antietam matters because that's what led to the Emancipation Proclamation, which changed the aim of the Civil War to add ending slavery. Now, that changed the country, absolutely. So believe it or not, I don't think we knew Battle of Antietam all that well until that book just came out, the second one, you know? So there are things that are very much understudied that are actually major events. I don't think it depends if you're talking about like outside of the scholarship world, in the popular world, I'm not even sure we understand the constitutional period very well. Things that we think we know, so we don't look. The debates around the Constitution, the opposition to it, the efforts for it, the different opinions about it. Because if we did, we wouldn't be constantly saying that the founders believed this one thing, and that's always what's true. So I think even some of the most obvious topics are not well known before we get into some of the more obscure things. A good example, actually, if you want to talk about that, is Whitestone Hill. If you go around the country, not a lot of people are going to know about it, right? But if we learn more about those kinds of places, then we'll get to unpack some of these stories the way that we are and these different layers of questions that we're talking about. A lot of communities have sites in some way that give that sort of questioning, to give rise to that sort of questioning. And I think a lot of times it should be done locally. It's not always at a national level. Do we have time for one more? Want to pick one from online? One more from online or no?
We lost him.
We lost him, all right. All right, guys, so grab one more. Let me grab one more.
Okay.
What I point to for that is actually the controversies that are happening in these recent years, right? So if history is not all that relevant, then why do we keep fighting over these monuments? Why do we fight over the 1619 project? You really love it or hate it. Why are you fighting over it? It must mean that you think it's relevant. You wouldn't be fighting over something that's not relevant. Well, why do you think it's relevant? Well, because it's going to teach our kids great or bad or whatever things about who we are. Oh, so you're telling me that history helps shape who people think are, must mean it's pretty important, right? So you got to meet them where they're at. If I just show up and say history is important, they're not going to understand. But if I pick on something where they're already talking about, I do think that helps. And then I don't think we always have to make it a vocational thing. I think sometimes we obsess over, oh, well, look at all these vocational skills it gives you. And it does. But I think that's a tougher sell, to be honest with you. I think education, we have to be able to sell it as something that's broader, to be a good citizen, which has different pillars. One of those pillars is vocation. I'm not saying ignore it, but it's not the only pillar. And so if you're good at these things, and now the question is, how do I take that and maybe attach it with a vocational skill and connect those to move forward? So I think that's another way is you can say, well, how about if we do humanities plus vocation, right? And this is how these two can interact. That's another way you can do that. That's what I did. That's what I did. I took humanities plus vocational or professional, whatever, and I connected it to navigate it into a vocation. You see what I'm saying? So I think those are some of the ways we could do that. So again, it's meeting them where they're at and then building upon it, trying to broaden and expand. Cool. All right, guys. So I'm going to hang out here one-on-one afterwards in the back. Come chat with me. Brenna, what you got?
Okay. So on November 5th, Sarah Gorman will be at Bruhala for our Think and Drink discussing conspiracy theories. So I hope to see you all there. Raffi will be in Bismarck on October 8th. So if you want to travel there because you want a second dose of this, that would be awesome. He's also our most popular public university professor. Those are free online classes. He has one going now. If you'd like to take it, talk to me or Sue and we'll get you signed up for free. And then he has a different class that will be starting in the spring. So sign up for a mailing list and we're going to be announcing that soon. And then finally, the staff at Humanities North Dakota loves to humiliate themselves. So I hope you enjoy this short video.
Meet ignorance. He's always up to something.
No, stop. I don't know where you get your information from. No, forget it. I'm just done.
Ignorance loves sowing fear, anger, and misunderstanding wherever he goes.
Did you know the moon landing is a hoax?
Can anything stop Iggy from his campaign of chaos?
Someone put an end to ignorance.
The game's afoot.
There were those who didn't fall for ignorance's tricks.
Aha! Where were you when ignorance lost his bliss?
We were in a study, expanding our knowledge.
And you?
We were in the lounge having a spirited yet respectful conversation.
Utterly amazing.
We were out on the porch, getting fresh air and fresh perspectives.
How clever. There is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. You've all had a hand in Iggy's demise. But I must ask, is there anyone else who could have helped end ignorance? Was it you?
Make a difference and join the fight against ignorance. Visit Humanities North Dakota today. Humanities North Dakota, a community for lifelong learners.
Thanks for coming, everybody. We really appreciate it.